And in Haiti, violent protests broke out after the government announced a rise in fuel prices. The prime minister is urging calm, but calls are growing for him to resign. Many businesses and homes have been damaged as the demonstrations continue. Some embassies have also been forced to close. Amy Willentz is here to give us her analysis on this. She's a contributing editor for The Nation magazine who has covered Haiti for more than 20 years. She's also an English professor at UC Irvine. Amy, it's so great to have you to talk to us about this situation because it hasn't really gotten a lot of attention in the national media, and I'm so happy that you've been keeping it front and center of your reporting. The public frustration goes beyond just the rise in fuel prices in Haiti. Walk us through the political and economic situation in Haiti that has led us to this point.
So I think that most people don't understand the level of poverty in Haiti, and that's been the basis of the protests. It's that they're sick of it. There was a sign in one of the crowds at one point that said, "We just want to live like other people. We want to live like everybody." And for so long, it's not been the case that they can live like everybody. And so the fuel price hike underlies the whole thing, because you can't live like everybody if gasoline costs too much for you to afford. I think we see this a little in the States, but of course in Haiti, where people live on about $500 a year, it's a lot harder when their gas prices go up and they can't move products and they can't get to market and they can't do anything really, and everything else goes up. So a lot of the protest is about the cost of living, but a lot of it is about corruption, and corruption is tied also to the fuel prices, because there was a big discount that Venezuela offered Haiti a long time ago, and the monies from that discount were to go to social programs in Haiti. It was a sort of gift on loan from Hugo Chavez of Venezuela, and all the monies were stolen, and that came to about $2 billion. So $2 billion disappeared from this social fund that was supposed to help the Haitian people, and they're angry about that. And then when prices go up, that's a problem. But there's also a problem of the gangs in Haiti. There are 200 gangs over the whole national territory, and some of them are very strong, especially in the capital, and it's very violent because of these gangs. They're heavily armed. Arms keep coming into Haiti, and ammunition from the United States, not from the government, obviously, but from Miami. And these gangs have done massacres and have displaced whole neighborhoods and have stopped traffic and have stopped gasoline from moving around the country at various times. So the people are sick of the government.
And you're probably sort of answering that question, but so we have all this money that was meant to be there as aid that is evaporated. Who do the protesters blame for that? Who took the money? Where is it?
Well, they blame a series of governments. The government of Michel Martelly, right after the earthquake, the devastating earthquake that everyone will remember of 2010. And they blame then his successor, Jovenel Moïse, who was assassinated in the summer of 2021. And then they blame the de facto prime minister who has followed Jovenel Moïse to power with the support of the United States, Ariel Henry. So they blame all three of those men, and Ariel Henry happens to be the one in power who has done basically zero for the Haitian people since he arrived in power 14 months ago after the assassination of his predecessor.
And so let's talk about then what the response from the Biden administration has been. Amy, you talked about this caretaker government that has been there since the assassination of President Jovenel Moïse, but with no elections planned, at least as far as I can tell, and the United States seeming to be okay with that because of perhaps overtures that the interim prime minister may have made to the U.S. government. U.S. government's got a lot of other things on its plate, and as long as they get the responses from the interim government in Haiti that they want to hear, they just leave them to their own devices.
But what are those responses, Vlad? You make a very good point. Those responses primarily consist of willingness to accept migrants who have been on the U.S. border back into Haiti. So that's been about, I think, around 17,000 people have been brought from the United States, not, because they want to come back to Haiti, but by the U.S. government, by the Biden administration, they've been flown back into Haiti, where many of them have no family anymore. They've been gone for 5 years, trekking on foot all the way to the U.S. border through South America. So,
and Amy, just so I can, just to add to that, I mean, that was, that's a key point there, because you remember, Anne Marie, that there was an encampment of Haitian migrants in Del Rio, Texas.
Yeah.
And the United States, there was a lot of media that was focused, and people wondering, well, how did they get there? And how do we get them to a place where they can either be successfully immigrated into the United States if they're applying for asylum, or to deport them? And so the Haitian government agreed to retake those migrants back into Haiti, and agreed at any time that there were migrants trying to get into the United States that they would bring them back to Haiti. And as Amy points out, Amy, and correct me if I'm wrong, the Biden administration stopped pressuring Ariel Henry to hold any elections to replace himself when he agreed to those terms.
That's one thing. They also promised to continue. I mean, we believe that they promised to continue to support him in power, because there are other things that can happen in Haiti than elections. The guy, Ariel Henry, excuse me for calling the prime minister of Haiti de facto the guy, but he has, he can be replaced at any moment because he's de facto, he's interim, he's a caretaker, as you said. You don't need elections to replace him. And there is a very, very successful opposition movement in Haiti against this president. But the United States has been sort of keeping them at arm's length because it's a huge umbrella group consisting of a lot of democratic grassroots factions. It makes the U.S. nervous, whereas Ariel Henry says, I'll accept your migrants back into Haiti, but leave me alone. And so there he is, but he's very alone. And the protests have been very violent. At least I'm sure he's been worried about his own security at times. But there's no way that Haiti can go to elections right now. The situation on the ground is way too violent. I wouldn't vote in Haiti, and I think most Haitians feel that way right now. It would be a very unsuccessful election.
Now, forgive my own ignorance, but to me, it seems like, so here you have a situation where you have a de facto president, right, who can be replaced at any time without an election, you say. You have growing opposition groups. It seems like it's kind of ripe for some, if it's a coup or some sort of takeover that is not an election. It seems like it's ripe for chaos.
Well, it's not ripe for chaos. There's chaos right now, and that's the problem. And the problem is that Ariel Henry is a very unsuccessful leader, and he hasn't led the Haitian people. He's been, he's sitting on top of many corruption scandals. I'm not saying that he himself is corrupt, but his predecessors and the way he came to power are very questionable. And so right now, it's sort of been a coup anyway, because no one elected him. He was appointed by his predecessor 2 days before the predecessor was assassinated. He's been implicated in the assassination. So it's not a normal situation. And I don't think you could call it a coup d'etat. There's no army to push him out.
Yeah,
it would have to be the international community that pushed him out.
And Amy, as you point out, I mean, one of the reasons, and this was sort of, I mean, and Haitians can still have a sense of humor about things. Ariel Henry emerged from wherever he has been a few weeks ago to say that the reason he hadn't made any speeches was because he was working really, really hard. Of course, that drew a lot of mockery on social media, on Haitian Twitter. But Amy, before you go, the one thing that I found really, and I'm so glad you were able to join us today, is that for the very first time, going back to the earthquake in 2010, I have ordinary Haitians, people that I know that are in Haiti, people who've helped us, CBS News, to cover events in Haiti, calling me and saying, you need to help me, like personally, because the situation has gotten so dire. These are people who survived the earthquake and were able to carve out a little piece of existence for themselves, who are calling me and saying, hey, this is really it. I don't know. People are telling me it's never been this bad in Haiti. And it's just unbelievable that this tiny country that is just off of our shores is still suffering, hundreds of years after its independence, but also in the wake of really some horrific things that have happened in just the last 10 or 15 years.
Yeah, my friends have been calling me saying, we can't get water. A friend just told me this morning he shipped 5 gallons of water from his house to the house of an 80-year-old neighbor, and he can't get to the bank. And, you get many sob stories coming out of Haiti, but this one is particularly cruel and bad. Although I noticed this morning the barricades that have stopped all traffic in the capital seem to be down again, but they've been put down and then gone up again several times in the past week. So, I mean, I hope things can change. I do lay some responsibility on the Biden administration for not pushing more for change.
Amy Willentz, thank you very much for keeping this front and center for us. We appreciate you joining us here at CBS News. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Glenn.